Around 100 asylum seekers are again being held in Australia's offshore processing centre in Nauru after numbers dropped to zero in June last year. Mohammed Bashir Ajub from Pakistan is being housed in Regional Processing Centre 1, or RPC1. Joining me is Caleb Fotheringham, who was there. Kia ora, Caleb. What's life like for asylum seekers on Nauru?
Kia ora sana. So it really depends who you talk to. I spoke to the president. We managed to fire a few questions away to him, and he would say that their life is actually pretty good. They've got everything that they need in terms of healthcare. Everything is provided for them, and all their needs are met. And interestingly, I actually also managed to ask one of the locals, and they had a similar position to the president. They thought the asylum seekers' lives were pretty good. They even said that in some instances, the asylum seekers were living better lives than the locals because I don't know if this is true, but at least I was told by this local man that they had AC and most of the locals didn't have air conditioning. So it was interesting getting that perspective. But really, if you talk to the asylum seekers themselves, especially on Regional Processing Centre 1 or RPC 1, they would say that it's not that great. One man that I spoke to, especially, he said that the healthcare is totally inadequate, and that's for physical needs. So he had requested by the GP to see a specialist 3 times for his eye because he said his eyesight was getting worse and worse and worse. And he didn't get to see a specialist. The GP just gave him drops, which he said did absolutely nothing. And then on the other side of that, he said that the mental health support is also very inadequate. Now, you've got to remember that these people, they have come from extremely traumatic situations. The person that I spoke to said that he was tortured and kidnapped when he was in Pakistan. So that for context, I mean, they really need good mental health services, and that's coming from this man who actually had some really good mental health services when he was in Australia because he was there for a period as well. And I spoke to the people in the community, the asylum seekers in the community as well, because there's a few of them there. And overall, they seemed actually okay with how they were treated. Their main issue was that they felt like they were not getting enough money from the Australian government. So that was 460 Australian dollars that they said they had received. I haven't verified that, but that's at least what they have told me. And they said that is incredibly, incredibly hard to live on. It's just not enough for them. So that's their main concern is just the amount of money that they've been given. But in terms of life inside the community, they said it is okay. Now, another really, really big thing in RPC1 is that they take away people's mobile phones, and they actually do that before they actually get to Nauru. They do that in Australia, and they were told that that was for security reasons. And it may seem like a bit of a luxury, a smartphone, but the really big reason why it's necessary is because asylum seekers, that's how they can keep people accountable. It's got a camera on it. So if something's going bad, they can film it, they can take photos, they can send it to people like you and I who can write about it. Without that, there's just not the same evidence that anything's going wrong. Another reason is WhatsApp. It's just far easier to communicate. That's what a lot of the lawyers use to communicate with their clients in Nauru. So that's another big aspect to it. And yeah, so the smartphone thing's a big issue as well.
What was your experience like as a journalist there?
It was clear from the onset that we weren't really wanted. Visas took a while to be processed, and we managed to get on the flight, thankfully, because I believe we were with Winston Peters, of course, Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand, Minister of Foreign Affairs. And normally, for journalists, you have to pay $8,000 for the visa for the visa application fee, and it's 8,000 Australian. And thankfully, we did not have to do that. But when we were on the island, it was clear that the government was very standoffish. Questions they had to be pre-approved by President Adiang before we asked them to asked him the questions, and we managed to get a few. That was restricted to 2 questions each, by the way. So there was only 4 questions. Um, and when I managed to find the local guy who drove me around the island, he was also seriously concerned. And I won't say what he was concerned about because it might give away his identity, but he was really concerned. And from my point of view, it seemed like his concerns were valid, that he would be identified with the journalist. So he told me, if anybody asks, you're a tourist, you are hitchhiking, and that is why you're in the car. When we went up to the detention centers, because that was one of the things I wanted to do, take photos of the detention centers. He kept driving. He really didn't want me to step out of the car, and rightfully so. He just didn't want to be seen with a journalist. I mean, it would seem very suspicious. And that's probably that's the main reason why a lot of my photos are really blurry, just because we had to keep driving the whole way through. And then when we were looking for asylum seekers in the community, we first drove past a security guard, and he just kept driving, and he said we can't pull over. I didn't recognize it was a security guard at first, but he's like, we can't go there when there's the security guard there. And then we had to loop around, and then the security guard was gone. So then we could actually do the interview with the asylum seekers. The asylum seekers themselves, funny enough, when I actually interviewed them, they were very relaxed. They even let me take photos of them. They were absolutely fine with being named. And that was the same with Muhammad, who I spoke to in RPC1. Also, keeping in mind with how journalists are treated, there's a history of journalists not being treated all that well in Nauru. Of course, in 2018, Barbara Drever, she was arrested, and that was during the Pacific Islands Forum. That was a different time, to be fair, and tensions were a lot higher. There was a lot more refugees, but it still is obvious that there's a bit of a hangover from when there was a lot of asylum seekers on the island, and the Nauru government really didn't want people to talk to them.
But even with you not being able to take proper photos of the detention center, that's still intense. So where are the asylum seekers going to go?
Yeah, it was very intense. But where the asylum seekers are going to go, it's super unclear. New Zealand made an arrangement with Australia in 2022 to take 450 refugees in 3 years. So that would finish in June 2025. And New Zealand hasn't reached that number. So you could think that, well, New Zealand will take them because they have made this promise to Australia. But the government said that the new arrivals, so there were no asylum seekers last year on June, all the asylum seekers left last year on Nauru, and then they just all got taken by New Zealand, and I believe some went to Canada and maybe the States. And now in September, new arrivals started coming again. But the government said that those people, the new arrivals, which is about 100 of them at the moment, they do not fall into this agreement. So New Zealand is not responsible for taking them. And Australia as well, they have made it very, very clear that they are not going to take anybody. In 2013, they said that anybody who comes on boat will not be able to permanently settle in Australia. So, to be frank, Sana, I have absolutely no idea who's going to take these asylum seekers.
Meitaki Caleb, and safe travels home. And for those of you interested in Nauru, we'll have a full report from Caleb on the visits and the Australian-run detention centres in Nauru in our next Pacific Waves show.